is really more like my family. If you go through and you take a look at the leading male character in most of these stories and the leading female character, they're gonna look an awful lot like Marilyn and me. But they go through from the beginning, well, from the 1940s, and in the last, spoiler alert, in the last story in this one, I die, okay? So we know it's fiction, by the way. No, excuse me. And then these don't have any reflection to me personally, with the exception of the first two are long, and the first one is very much like my experience set in Wisconsin when I was like 9 years old. Okay, so that's very similar. And then you get 3, 4, and 5, and they're set in Utah, but don't have anything to do with me at all. And then number 6 happened when I had cancer, and I had all sorts of hallucinations. And so I picked the one that was most articulate and wrote about it. So I'm around in a lot of these.
Those were interesting phone conversations. He'd be telling me about these hallucinations, and I wasn't sure what he believed.
What was that?
You talking to you on the phone
During your cancer.
when you were in the hospital and telling me about these hallucinations, and I was trying to figure out, wait, what? Is this real? What are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I was still, at one point I was still teaching, and there were 3 young people that never spoke but were standing behind me when I was trying to, we were teaching online at that moment in time, and I was trying to work out the class project, and these people were there. And what happened was eventually I asked a neighbor of mine, are these 3 kids, are they like your grandchildren? And she said it was the scariest thing she'd ever heard in her life. And they got me into, you know more about some of these things that happened than I did, even though you were all the way across the country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ian, included me on an email thing that he wasn't doing well, he might need some help. And so then I started communicating with this neighbor who, saying, can you let these people in? So, anyway, yeah.
Was it the medication that was causing the hallucinations, or?
No, I had cancer and they gave me chemotherapy. Didn't work. And they were looking around for a substitute while I was losing my mind, essentially.
Yeah, basically, like the chemotherapy really, really weakened them. And part of the side effect of cancer was that his calcium levels got really high. And that he was not lucid. And that was right at the time when they decided that the chemo had to work and they prescribed something else. He was unable to follow through enough to pick up the prescription. So it just got worse until we got him in the hospital, and I contacted his doctor, and we figured out where this medicine was and how to get it to him. Yeah. Well, I knew where you were.
I didn't know where it was.
Can you imagine? I mean, and it was right in the middle of COVID. So he'd be like, can you tell Ian to come? It's like, he won't come,
Yeah.
The great thing about having cancer and trying to write is you can't go anywhere anyway.
Oh, that's also COVID. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't. She was just telling me the other day a lot of things I didn't even know about. So, I think my stories are better than your truth. That's the truth.
Well, that's generally your approach to stories and truth.
Well, I think we're gonna go, what, before we start, at least until, what you put on the things are 6:30?
Yeah,
Yeah, well, why don't we at least wait until 10 minutes to 7?
yeah, no problem.
Or thereabouts, and then I'll just give you a secret thing, and you can say, you know, we had this reading, and I was one of the only ones allowed in.
Yeah.
I'll just record it for old time's sake.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I buy the books tonight?
Sure, sure.
Do we just Venmo you or what?
It's cheaper, actually, if you buy it from me. It's $14.95 if you get it from the publisher or Amazon.
Well, I wanna get it tonight, so you
Well,
can
sure.
sign me a copy.
Well, they're right behind me.
Wait, maybe I could put up this like video as like an advertisement for it.
Pardon?
Like an advertisement for
That's
it?
what it's kind of for, yeah. But I like to do it anyway. I stop people on the street and read to them.
Must be a long stop.
No, I have done that trying to get actors. Haven't you, Jim? Just stop somebody on the street. Seriously.
I asked somebody to come last week that I needed an actress, and I just said, you know, are you free? Come. I met her online. I never seen her act at all. I just said, just come. We need a person. She turned out to be great.
Well, when I was doing all of those black plays, and there aren't that many black
Yes.
actors here. I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
you'd be good at it.
Yeah, I can teach you how to act.
But I don't know if I ever actually got an actor. I was pretty desperate usually.
You also went to church. I mean.
Yeah.
I was kind of feeling that in order to get the right sound, I had to go to the France Davis's church down on State Street, about 10th, I think. But and I went on a regular basis, and I think I really got stopped essentially when I got sick.
You stopped when what?
You got sick.
Oh, okay.
So, no, I really enjoyed being there. You know, singing with people and so on and so forth. And I love their music. So, I may still go back someday. Right now, I'm just trying to get through every day. I keep tripping over things. But,
Black and blue and purple and.
you know, I blame you. We never should have been down there. We should have been up there.
Yeah. But you were black and blue before I came, so.
No, that's true.
It's not all bad.
That's true.
We went to the Capitol yesterday, and he had a friend that.
What, you know Nan
Yeah.
Weber, of course.
So, we went intentionally so that she could give us a tour. And I just looked at parking lot near the Capitol, which is probably why nobody trusted me tonight. But, and so I was like parked downtown and really, should have just driven up to the Capitol. I didn't know that there were parking lots. So they ended up walking part of the way. I ended up going back and getting the car and moving it so we wouldn't have to do this again.
We walked most of the way. It was
Yeah.
only right
It was-
down the
we
hill.
could see it
You could
from where
see
we
the
were.
Capitol. We had one more road to go. He
fell.
fell.
And some people stopped to help.
Yeah, and a nice lady
Right.
gave us a ride with him
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
So
So, yeah.
Nice meeting people, though I don't recommend that way.
but yeah.
Yeah, somebody came out from his house with Band-Aids and helped him clean it off, and then, somebody else
The
helped
woman who
get him out.
drove us up was a trauma
Nurse, yeah,
Yeah.
the one that stopped to make sure you were okay and offered the ride was the trauma nurse, so.
It's really an interesting tour. I had never, I've lived here 45 years and never gone on that tour.
I've never done this one either.
I've never been up around there except during protests.
What is it on the tour?
Oh, we went over all the floors and we went to the Senate room and the House room and they're very impressive. And
And
I
we
got
talked
the-
about like how they built it. They talked, Kettering, the
Yeah.
architect,
cluttering.
and Fluttering.
Cluttering, yeah.
That's right. I'm sorry. And
He's a German architect, and I actually recorded his voice up there because of Nan, but apparently it's not up there anymore. Just according, I asked the guy, I didn't want to say, my voice is here, and then not everyone hear it.
But yeah, and there's some interesting bits about Utah. There's interesting, like the fact that the original state capital was going to be in Fillmore. Which if you've ever been to Fillmore, it's kind of funny. But and yeah, and like the sources of the materials that were used to build the capital and stuff like that. Interesting architecture.
You can tell the difference between that and the Cat Cafe.
We went to the cat cafe later in the day. Because we got 4 cats at home that we are really missing.
And so she's like,
Well, we went down to Slack, beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Oh, you did? Oh,
And that was very funny.
Was it? Oh, that's cool. I'll have to go try to see it.
Well, I think it's just opened last week, wasn't it? But they were here. And so it was good timing.
yeah, I actually found Wendy Joseph on Facebook and sent her a message saying that I was impressed. And she said that was very kind of you to say so.
Who was it?
Wendy Joseph, the one who played Eleanor.
Oh,
Yeah. And she just,
well,
they were all good, but when she opened her mouth to sing, it was like an extra level. It was good. She was good.
yeah, well, she was also Great Bird, not Big Bird.
Not Rick Bird. No, she
No,
was.
she wasn't.
No, she wasn't.
No.
She was Eleanor in those. She was one of the
Lady Joseph
moving
was
it.
black.
Oh, you're talking about, oh, sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to actually cast her immediately. She could sing, she could dance.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
was
She has the
terrific.
presence.
She could dispense ice cream from her fingertips.
Yeah, that was impressed. Speaking of being impressed, what have we got?
652.
So, should I get in the dance that normally I proceed with?
I have a feeling if you did a dance, I'm not sure you'd survive it.
I only trip over things. What we have here is 2 books, and they're both published by Atmosphere Press, but you can get them online at Amazon. You can get them online through, I can't remember the other.
Barnes and Noble.
You can get them anywhere.
Yeah.
You can order them through your local bookstore. You can order them from Atmosphere Press. This one was published on July 10th, 2021, and this was published exactly 2 years later, so it would be 12 days ago. And we're going to focus on this one, but if anybody wants to order this one, we've got it here. The great thing about being here, that's really going to be a hard time for those bastards who aren't here, is it's much cheaper to buy them from me than it is to buy them from online or anything like that. This is 6 stories. I'm going to do the last 3 because the first 2 stories are much longer than the later ones. And also the 3 stories, 3 through 5, are also all set in Utah. And so I thought that would be a nice combination. And so I will go with that. And also these stories, you take a look at them and they do not really belong to me. But in some ways, they're very much, there's an incident that happens, for example, in the 4th story, The Bulb Eaters, which is really based upon something that happened in my mother's life, okay? So I thought it would be a nice combination of things. Try to use as many things from my family as I possibly can, because it's one of those problems, actually. The first story I could well get into trouble with my family. But they're not here now, and I had to have another story, so I wrote it. So we're going to start with number 3, and number 3 is entitled Change of Pace. And one of the phrases that I have to begin with is, for athletes and ingenues, middle age comes early. He was staring at her before he realized he was awake. She stood in front of the full-length mirror across the room from the foot of the bed, her arms stretched above her shoulders, carefully piling her long blonde brown hair on top of her head in a style from a different time or a different culture. In the morning light, filtered through the leaded windows, Joey studied the individual details whose graceful whole he had only imperfectly grasped the night before. The crown of hair made her head look small, a blossom emerging from the arc of her neck. How would his father have described the image? He struggled to recall. Pre-Raphaelite? His eyes traced the outline before him from the perfectly balanced shoulder blades down to the long waistline gently curving out to the hips. She was small, he realized. The legs, though well-formed, were not runway legs like those of the model he had dated in the last city he was stationed. His gaze was drawn again to the buttocks, high and firm, his interest evolving from the aesthetic to arousal. What was it she'd said in the bar? I get most of my jobs when I'm leaving the room. He laughed, not getting it. On one cheek was a tattooed Gothic capital letter he couldn't quite read. It's S for Cheryl. He flushed, suddenly aware of the amused pair of blue eyes regarding him from the mirror beyond the girl's shoulder. Instinctively, he clutched up the sheet, pausing in mid-reach at the idiocy of protecting himself from her nakedness. All the pledges did it that year. Some of them did the sorority's Greek letters as well, but I guess I always suspected that I wasn't going to stay. She was dressing now, panties, a low-cut bra, form enough to support, but while giving the impression of non-existence. Casual shorts, matching sandals, and a top she could button in the back without disturbing the elaborate hairdo. Joey felt a moment's discomfort, as if in the act of watching her clothe herself, he had become a voyeur rather than a lover. Objectification, his mother would have called it in one of her lectures. What time is it? 7 o'clock. Your watch is on the back of the toilet in the bathroom. There are extra towels in the hallway cupboard, and the coffee pot is on the burner in the kitchenette. She looked at him with a moment's anxiety. Do you like drip? I can't stand any other kind. 7 o'clock. Last night's game didn't end until after 10. Come back to bed. No can do. Cheryl hopped out in front, trying to fasten the other sandal. Jenny, you remember Jenny? Jenny will be here in 20 minutes, and we have to be on the set for makeup at 8. Though God knows what time they'll get around to shoot. Be a dear and help me button up the back of my blouse. I can't reach it. Joey inhaled the warmth of her body as his large fingers fumbled awkwardly at the nape of her neck. It was beginning to come back to him. Serenade for a six-shooter. He couldn't imagine how an historical novel had become a bestseller with such a B-Western title. But now the movie was stuck with it. Where's the shoe? He found his jockey shorts under the bed. The smell wasn't too ripe, and with his motel room next to the ballpark on the other side of town, they would have to do. A restaurant named Diamond Lil's. Her raised voice came from the bathroom. The Western motif is pretty fakey, but the balconies give the cameraman some good angles, and after the set designers have done their magic, it'll look like the real thing. It'll look like the Long Branch. A toilet flashed reluctantly, and a moment later, Cheryl reappeared, rubbing lotion into her hands. They'll have to close for 3 days, but the producers will pay them for a week, and all the publicity will be good for business. We've got time for a cup of coffee? Do you like cream? And she was off into the kitchenette. Joey pulled the Chico State t-shirt over his head and eased his feet into his boots, gingerly trying to protect the scar where a second baseman had spiked him when he was pinch running last week. Then Cheryl was back, placing a small folding table topped by a Japanese tray, spoons, napkins, 2 steaming cups, and a tiny silver pitcher of milk in front of him. He looked at the arrangement, bemused by the evident care she had taken. Can I get you a biscotti? I can't eat myself. If I gain an ounce, it looks like 10 pounds on screen. No, please, sit down with me. Enjoy your coffee. If a girl gave you sex, that was one thing. But if she fed you, she had to be taken seriously. What are you filming today? Cheryl spread a napkin on one knee and carefully balanced a saucer on it. She drank her coffee black. We'll start with the master shop of Melinda's big number in the dance hall scene and break it down from there. It's not in the book, of course, but you'd be crazy to hire Tammy Gale and not give her something that with Madison Square Garden in it. Want to do an extra? The guys we hired to be extras are so dumb that they're liable to hold up 1883 cigarette lighters when she launches into the chorus after the bridge. What will you do? The milk in the pitcher was skimmed. Well, like all the other girls, carry a tray with beer glasses to 4 assigned tables. It's non-alcoholic, even the heads are phony. Circle the tables counterclockwise, serving with my left hand from a tray in my right, all while wearing a gingham dress with a cleavage so deep it could qualify as a wildlife refuge. Good to know those years waiting tables between gigs haven't been wasted. If the director likes me, I get a shot of myself stuffing paper money in my bodice. Unless, of course, I get real lucky and get the grope and slap scene. Joey's attention, having traversed the 2 inches from Cheryl's blue eyes to her snub nose, was jerked back to the subject. The grope and slap scene, she explained. It's in every Western since John Ford. I wrote my term paper on it in film history. The professor thought I ought to publish it. She giggled. Actually, I think he just liked watching me walk out of the office after student conferences. I don't get it. In every dance hall or bar scene in a Western movie, some drunken cowboy grabs the hostess's arm or some other protruding appendage, depending upon the rating, and she says something smart and slaps him. Now that becomes a close-up and a line, and your name will be in the credits. And that's a big deal. Cheryl's eyes flashed. That's a start. That's Lana Turner on a drugstore stool, Dorothy Malone smiling at Humphrey Bogart in a bookstore, Marilyn Monroe on some crooked lawyer's arm candy. That's me with some other girl from Bakersfield studying my picture in a film history book. Joey stood up. You were in that commercial. The one with the rock star. What's his name? You remember. Cheryl was on her feet, pirouetting under a famous invisible hand, an empty coffee mug clutched in her left hand like the Coke can which had paid for the image. He stepped out into the room, taking the place of the now forgotten rocker, holding her hand as she pivoted away from him, then spun back in his arms, holding up in a freeze frame the coffee cup that had made it all possible. Well, that can't be. I saw that when I was still in school. You can't be more than 21 or 22. I'm 27. She leaned back into his body, holding the memory for a moment more. I was 18 then. Everybody on campus wanted to meet me. My sorority had to stop giving out my number. I had my choice of 3 agents, so I dropped out of school. She looked up at him, flashing a flawless smile. The commercial paid for my teeth to be capped. So that's how it all happened. He continued to hold her in his arms, and she seemed no hurry to leave. What happened? A touch of irony crept into Cheryl's voice. A string of commercials, none of them national. some magazine ads, a few walk-ons and forgettable films. I got killed before the credits in a Halloween movie whose number I don't even remember. A point girl on a local game show. She just gestured seductively towards the Japanese tray in a way that Bob Barker would have found familiar. Industrials. If I have to rub my body against one more Ford Explorer, I'll pack it in. Really? Really what? Cheryl mentally retraced her steps. Oh, no, of course not. Out in the street, a car horn blew. Well, that'll be Jenny. This place belongs to her aunt. I gotta run. Cheryl grabbed up a shoulder bag. Stay as long as you want to, but turn off the burner under the coffee and lock the door when you leave. Joey stepped in her path. She hesitated, then relaxed into his arms and looked up at him. How long will the shooting last? Well, as long as we can stand it. We only have the restaurant for 3 days. After the game is over, I'll come by and we'll go out for a late supper, okay? Okay, she said softly and quickly kissed him. Then, thinking the better of her haste, she reached up with both hands and drew his face down to hers. Outside, the car horn was impatient. Bye, and she was out the door. Joey sat at the counter at Denny's, watching the sports page, reading the sports page, while he waited for his eggs and sausage. He checked his stats in the box score of last night's 7-4 win. An inning and 2/3, 3 hits and a walk, 2 earned runs. It looked worse than it really was. The walk wasn't fair. The count had been 3-1 before he came into the game. The only solidly hit ball off him was that 1-out double in the ninth. The preceding 2 had been seeing eye singles. He and Rodenberg had agreed that he needed to work on his changeup. So when Rudy made the call with a 5-run lead, it seemed the perfect time. 3 seconds later, the ball hit the top of the wall in right field. It didn't matter. He got the next 2 guys. If the skipper had been worried, he would have taken him out after the 3 consecutive left-hand hitters in the 8th. Rodenberg probably told him that he needed the work. It was only his 4th appearance in the last 2 weeks, and the first 3 times he pitched to no more than 2 batters. The waitress dropped off the hot plate and refilled his coffee cup without looking at him. Joey dug in ravenously, absent-mindedly, tuning in to the geysers, talking in the booth behind him. His coach at Chico State had a theory that a pitcher could train himself to know what a runner was doing at second base without turning around. In those days, not very many hitters got as far as second base against him. Lately, the skill had been more useful. All I'm saying, the higher pitched of the 2 voices insisted, is that it don't make me a faggot. Well, what in God's sake said it did? Came back the harsh rasp of a 3-pack-a-day smoker. Well, that dyke who runs the real estate office over on 39th, she's supposed to have this hotshot vinyl collection, so I go over there to see if she's got Peggy Lee's Is that all there is? Is that all there is of what? It's a song, meathead. Peggy Lee, 1969. So I ask her, and she says, nobody but a weepy old fag would have that record. And unless I want to buy a house to get out of her office because she's got better things to do than indulge the fucked up taste of a weaky old fag. Well, geez, don't take it out on me. I ain't responsible for your fucked up meathead tastes. They ain't fucked up. Well, I'm just standing there with my mouth open, too dumb to spit, and she's on a roll. She says, I suppose a weepy old fag like you gets all slobbery over Judy Garland and can't wait for Barbra Streisand to die so that you can get slobbery over hers. I swear that woman only knows 3 words of greeting, and weepy and old are 2 of them. You gonna eat that donut? Don't you even breathe near that donut. And for God's sake, use the ashtray. So I says to her, fuck you, lady. You ain't never gonna catch me buying no house from you. You can just keep your houses and set in them and play your hot shot vinyl collection, and I walks out. I didn't know you was gonna buy a house. That ain't the point, you piece of shit. The point is, I do like Garland, and I do like Streisand, and I'm not a faggot. You're not a faggot just because you like songs that tell the truth. Peggy Lee sings. Is that all there is? It's about this girl whose house burns down. Her daddy takes her to a circus, and she falls in love. And all those things turn out to be disappointments. And she thinks about killing herself and decides that that would probably be a disappointment too. You see, the truth about it is, the truth about life is that everything you think is so important turns out to be a disappointment. But you go on anyway, 'cause that's the way the game is played. Joey felt a vibration in his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. Caller ID. He parked on the main street perpendicular to the ballpark and listened for a moment before turning off the engine. The knock was back. He really should take it in for a tune-up. Maybe he could leave it with Cheryl. She didn't have a car. He suddenly realized that he didn't know how long Serenade for a 6-shooter would be in town on location, or how long Cheryl would be with the company. This part of the country didn't lack for western scenery, and there wasn't any excuse for a dance hall girl to be out in it. Getaway day was Thursday in this league, which meant an afternoon game tomorrow and leaving tomorrow night. The mad trip, the road trip, was only 8 games, but Cheryl would likely be gone before he returned. He felt a sharp pang of regret. Joey glanced at his watch as he walked down the tunnel toward the dressing room. 10-1. The place would be empty. The manager, a couple of the coaches, certainly Rotenberry, if they were going to work on his changeup, would be expected, which what he expected was what he would be asked to come early for. 3 o'clock was the time for the players to sign in. Rudy might be there, and they might need a catcher if the skipper was taking part in the workout. They wouldn't need a catcher. Rex Schultz had taught and been a bullpen coach in the big league for 13 years. leaving the Twins when he realized the front office would never make him manager. He started all over in A-ball with this organization and worked his way up, but with Rutherford, 10 years younger than Schultz, a couple of pennants under his belt, and even better at managing the media than he was the parent club ahead of him, his chances of moving up were slim. Still, Dutch Schultz could analyze a pitcher better by catching him than most managers could by standing behind the mound. And anything he didn't know, Rodenberg, the pitching coach, did. Joey would be in good hands. Schultz was waiting for him at the clubhouse door. "Hi, Skip. Let me get a minute to get dressed and I'll be right with you." "Now come into my office first, Joey. We got some things to look over." He followed the manager down the corridor and into a room crowded with battered institutional furniture and evidence of the profession. A scarred wooden desk covered with scattered paper files and lineup cards. A tall wire basket filled with baseball bats in one corner, and walls lined with Twins memorabilia, photographs of the 87 and 89 or 91 world champs, pictures of Rod Carew, Ken Herbick, Jack Morris, Kirby Packett, and others Joey didn't recognize. "Is Rodenberg here yet?" "Nah, you can talk to him later when you want." The manager leaned back in the big chair on the wall side of the desk and interlaced his catcher's mid-sized fingers behind his head. "Sit down, Joey." Joey found a chair opposite the desk and tried to look comfortable. Dutch picked up a file and leafed through it. "How old are you, Joey?" 29. The manager looked dubious. "It says here that this is your 10th season in the organization and that you were drafted out of college as a junior with the 24th pick. 23rd. I was a Rule 5 draftee by Cincinnati 4 years ago, but I was waived and re-signed here. As for school, the folks were teachers, and I started early." "Chico State?" "Nah, Chico offered me a scholarship, and I thought it would be a good idea to get away from home." Dutch smiled wryly. "Folks not too happy about your playing professional ball," he guessed. Well, they were okay with it. They wanted me to go back to school in the off-season, but college starts too early in the fall and baseball too early in the spring. So Joey broke off, aware that his manager had lost interest. Dutch's lined face took on an ill-suited representation of fatherly concern. "It's time that we had a little talk about your future in the organization. Do you know how many left-handers the parent club has? Remember when we sent up Ryan? Menendez is an all-star. There's another 2. Wiseman just came off the DL yesterday and gave them a quality start. 7 innings of 4-hit ball. That means we'll be getting back Peterson, a right-hander, or Ryan." The manager broke off for a moment and glanced through the file again as if he had expected to discover some information in it. "You know how we've been using you lately, Joey?" "Sure, as a specialist against left-handed hitters. 1 batter, maybe 2, then I'm back in the dugout. But if I can get my changeup lower in the strike zone, I figured how high you throw your changeup isn't the problem, Joey. Schultz looked pained at having to point out the obvious. The problem is that you got an 82-mile-an-hour fastball. Your changeup isn't that much of a change. A batter doesn't have to adjust. I can send you in after a right-hander with a lot of hop on the ball and be pretty sure you won't walk anybody, and it'll take at least one hitter to adjust to the different angle and velocity. He looked up at the ceiling, determined to say his piece without interruption. If they send down Ryan, I'll have 4 lefties, including 2 starters and my closer. I need right-handers for the 7th and 8th inning to break up the hitters' rhythms. Plus, the organization has got this kid, Stokowski, who they want to move up from Double-A. This gives me 4 other lefties, Joey, and they're all younger than you. Stokowski is 21, Joey, and he throws at 98 miles per hour. Joey's eyes were on the floor, searching for a loophole amid the cleat-marked tiles. But if they send down Peterson, it doesn't matter. I don't make these decisions, Joey. The organization is releasing you. So that's it. That's it. It didn't work out. Relieved at having gotten to the point, Dutch changed his tone. Now, like I said, you're a left-hander who can get the ball over the plate. Here you're a victim of the numbers. But there are clubs that could be interested in that combination. Call your agent. Stokowski will join us on the road Friday. You've got 10 days before you have to vacate the motel. And we still have to pay you the league minimum for the rest of the season, or until you sign with someone else. Joey stood up and numbly offered a hand, which the manager took and held. Look, let me give you some advice. Don't do anything right away. Think about your future. You might get another job on this level or below, but you're never going to get to the show. You might want to start thinking 9 to 5 while you're still young enough to start over. Dutch was walking him to the door. Don't make any snap decisions. Go fishing. Think about what your folks said about going back to school. Take some time off. When I left the Twins, I took a whole season, and I was amazed at all the things I'd missed. Watching my kids in Little League ball, going to a movie with the wife, at night, in the summer. All those things I'd missed in 20 years of pro ball. But you went back. Yeah, I went back. He stood, leaning against one of the false hitching rails outside of Diamond Lil's. The security guard had told him that once the red light next to the front door went out, there would be an extended break in the shooting, and he could go in as long as he stayed out of the crew's way. It was getting dark. Joey was checking his watch again when the bulb blinked off. A clipboard-carrying kid with acne and a contemptuous attitude pointed him toward the employees' break room. The featured players had trailers in the parking lot out back. Like bit players and extras, the detritus of the acting profession had to take what they could get. Joey picked his way over cabled tentacles and through the organized chaos of grips and gaffers and knocked on the door. He could have saved the effort. No one among the gaggle of women in varying states of 19th century undress paid him the slightest attention. The vocal pitch of the chatter might have been higher than the combination of cacophony and sweat familiar to Joey from 100 locker rooms. Across the room, a can-can girl fantasy leaned over a leg propped up on a folding table, carefully applying clear nail polish to a run in a fishnet stocking. Cheryl? She straightened up, automatically replacing the cap on the bottle, as she looked around in search of the masculine voice. She wore an orange organdy dress trimmed in black lace with a bodice as horizontal to the floor as the prow of a ship, and gaining in eroticism as it lost in authenticity by stopping at the peak of the fishnet-covered legs. Joey! She ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. Looking down, he could see tired lines around her eyes where the makeup had dried and caked. He loved her. They walked arm in arm. They walked arms around one another's waist, through the back parking lot, weaving in and out of the trailers. Cheryl chattered happily about the shoot and the company, identifying one trailer as Tammy Gale's and another as assigned to the Australian actor who was playing the Texas Ranger opposite her. Although, what was the point when he spent all of his time in Tammy's trailer anyway? They would have to change that when Tammy's husband, another Nashville singer, showed up on Friday. When they circled around to the back of the restaurant, she stopped and hugged him out of sheer exuberance. I've got to get back and take off this costume before they close up the place. Let's not go out to eat tonight. I'll make you supper. I'm a good cook. Jenny's aunt's place has got a nice kitchen, and I've got something important to tell you. Me too. What is it? You first. Cheryl couldn't stand still. She grabbed his hands and tried to repeat the Coke commercial move, but Joey let go. Disappointed by his failure to respond, she stepped back dramatically. I got the scene! Ta-da! She spread out her hands and waited for the applause. What scene? The grope and slap scene, silly. The classic. I told you about it. Nick Blake, the director, had the idea when he saw me working at one of my tables. She demonstrated the pose. Look, I was circling my table with my back to the camera. I told you I get most of my jobs when I'm leaving the room. And Nick yells, cut! And he blocks it out at the spot. He's a genius. And though we won't be able to shoot it until tomorrow, I'm on the left side of the table, and Billy Wade, the stuntman, reaches out and grabs my ass. I've got this empty tray in my right hand, and I turn, and in one motion, backhand him over the table downstage. I stand there with my hands on my hips and say, it'll take more gold than you've got to plant your stake in that claim, sodbuster. That's not funny. It doesn't matter, Cheryl was exasperated. By tomorrow morning, the writers will have at least 4 other punchlines. We'll just use the one that works the best. But tonight we celebrate. Now, what happened with you? I've been released. The girl looked confused. What? You mean you've been traded? Where? No, I've been cut. Fired. Deep 6. A note of bitterness crept into Joey's voice. The club, the whole organization, let me go. I don't have a job in baseball. She was still processing the information. But don't you have a contract? They have to pay you, not play you. Well, what will you do? Can you catch on with another team? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure I want to. Listen, he took his hands in hers. This might be a good time to try something else, to start over. I'm thinking about going home while I try to think it out. Why don't you start over too? Go with me after the shoot is over. You could meet my folks. I could meet your folks. Do you have folks? Cheryl stared up at him as if he were an X-File outtake. I can't. Not now. Why not? You're bright, beautiful, you could do anything. Think about it. No more Ford Explorers. No more getting killed before the credits. But not now. The moon dipped behind the trailer roof, highlighting the earnestness in her upturned voice. This could be my breakthrough. Nick wants me to go with him to New Orleans. He's making a movie for cable about people who are trapped in a bar when Katrina hits. I'll have a featured role. She touched the wall of the conveyance behind her. I'd have a trailer for a change. From what? FEMA? Don't be angry, Joey. She put her hands on his chest. This is my chance. Why don't you come with us? You said the ball club has to pay you. Nick will get you a job as an extra. I know he will. Us? I bet he will. Cheryl flushed. It's not like that. Don't you make it like that. Look, she studied to regain control. I can't wait any longer. Promise me you'll wait here until I change my clothes and then we'll talk. Promise me, okay? The light from the stadium lit up the sky as he drove past. His motel was only a couple of blocks further on and a block to the north, but he kept going out of town and up into the foothills. The lights from the McMansions growing fewer and fewer until he reached a mountain overlook from which he could survey the city below and parked. He folded his arms on the steering wheel, rested his chin, and looked at the moon. It was in its third quarter, and in a few nights, the sky would be dark. Absent-mindedly, he switched on the radio, tuned by habit to the local ESPN station. Dutch signals to the bullpen for the left-hander, Sean Ryan, just set down from the parent club. Now we'll be back with his stats right after this 1-minute timeout from Coca-Cola. Joey hit the FM button for the oldies station opposite on the dial. Is that all there is? Is that all there is? If that's all there is, my friends, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball. If that's all that there is. That's it. Do you want me to go on? Or, Thank you very much.
I can't clap very well with the camera in my hand. I can't clap very well with the camera in my hand.
I keep moving.
Put it down.
Well, I want to record it. Also, I think it'd be a nice sort of promotion, you know, if this were on YouTube.
All of it?
I mean,
Edit a little bit.
why?
Edit what you just did. Out.
I think that's funny. I think.
Siblings.
I took really good pictures.
Okay, good.
Remember John Wilson? Of course you do. He once clapped his hands. He applauded when he was wearing, yeah.
Oh.
What was it? It was like he was wearing a what?
He was wearing a cross. He had a cross around his neck,
Oh.
and he clapped his hands. A cross, you know.
Like,
Did it go into his
Well, I
hands?
know that, but
Yes.
like,
I would say.
like through? Like
Not
in?
all the way through, no, just,
oh, the cross went into the. Oh, okay.
yeah.
Where did the title come from, artist?
Change of pace. That is a pitch. You know, a change of pace is a slow, sometimes breaking pitch that you throw after your fastball and it throws the batter off balance. But if you're only throwing 82 miles an hour, the change of pace comes in too slow and the batter can hit it. He describes the one time in the night before where the batter got a double off him off the top of the wall, the only change-up that he threw. And plus, change of pace, what does it mean? It means you're going to be doing something different. And so that's what the title is. Okay. You're going to have more trouble later on.
Before we start the next one, I want to ask: is there like any website that anyone who could like get this? Yeah, give me a website so I can put like the description or of the video or whatever.
Of the song?
The book.
The book of a place you can like buy the book so that you know you could.
Oh, they have where you can work out your own publication. I don't believe it, but hey. Okay, another Utah story.
We're just waiting for.
Here's one.
I'm gonna zoom in on Natalie now.
Okay. I think I've already asked you, but maybe I should ask now.
There you go.
There is a song here that is an LDS song, and I couldn't find the music.
Yeah.
Okay. What song is it?
What?
It's called
What are you saying?
Fair Flows the Sago Lily.
Never heard of it.
Okay, well apparently it was 60 years old at the time that the story was
We
written.
probably have taken it out of the.
It's not that old. It's 60 years old. At any rate. I'll read it to you,
Okay.
because if I can't sing it, why make
Yeah.
it up?
I thought your voice was pretty good, you know, for singing. Your singing voice was pretty good in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, it wasn't that good. But, huh?
Somebody doesn't know the tune to this song.
Oh.
Anybody want to go on with the next story here?
Sorry.
Okay. This story is called The Bull Beaters. Though afar from Utah's flowery hills I roam, or fighting in the ranks of men, fair flower of the sago lily of my home shall bid my heart return again. Looking back 60 years, it seems we children sang that song in every family gathering in my grandmother's house. I know that it wasn't old then, that my grandmother had heard it on the radio not long before my grandfather died and had chosen it to be sung at his funeral. I know that because my mother told me the story when she was planning her own funeral. And my children have heard it from me often enough to be sure that it will enliven the ceremony that accompanies my departure from the world. We are a family of instant traditions, and hard times have taught us that every contingency must be planned for. Still, to associate the song and the flower it describes with death isn't what the story is really about. It's about life and the odd and unusual places you find it, and the reason it's so precious. Life is precious because it's precarious. Death is important only because it gives life meaning, and because, although the fact of death is irrevocable, it may not be permanent. Forgive me, I'm getting into the philosophy before I tell the story. Let me give you a concrete example. Picture in your mind the children singing year after year. That does not change, but the children do. As you watch them, their faces change. You can see the maturity in some, disillusion in others, hope replaced by certainty, expectancy by disappointment, and all the possibilities of human experience. As time passes, the song remains, but the melody is carried by new voices, and others slip away to school, to war, to other households. What remains the same? A song, a flower, and in my memory, grandmother, sitting facing us in a high-backed, regal chair, surrounded in a half-moon arrangement by my father and his 4 brothers. Their handsome prosperity is proof of her fecundity and the extension of her life. She needs them there to remind her that they could be absent. Their lives are a rebuke to the fact of death, which has claimed so many others of her family. Her sons, in turn, have passed life on to yet another generation. They are a mirror of grandmother herself, who sits there, perfectly coiffed and elegantly dressed, the repudiation of the fact that a little girl once wore underclothes made from feed sacks and knew what it was like to be shoeless half the year. We can never completely triumph over the death which is our other face, but the song and the flower and the family lives on. Before the song came the flower, and because of the flower came the family. Grandmother called herself a bulb eater, and took pride in being a descendant of bulb eaters, particularly her grandmother. We always knew that grandmother would say that her great-grandmother was more eaten than an eater, although not everyone in the family appreciated grandmother's joke. If the tradition of a holiday at grandmother's house always included the Carl Fordham song, it was hardly the only performance of the day. The real highlight, especially for we girls, was gathering around grandmother for one of her stories. The physical pattern was always the same. The reverse of the picture of grandmother, surrounded by her sons. The smallest children would be seated, or perhaps would be lying on the rug in front, with older ones on chairs diagonally at the right, and left of grandmother, and the nearly grown girls, freed of the occasion of their chores in the kitchen, standing on either side of her. The subject areas were as predictable and numbered two: her life as a girl and the pioneer childhood of her grandmother. My favorite of the stories was grandmother and Aunt Rose going to school. Education was relative, my father used to say. By that he meant that if you had rich relatives, you got to go to school. Otherwise, your education was practical. A boy might learn how to milk a cow, butcher a hog, harness a horse, or turn it into a gelding. A girl would learn to can fruits and vegetables, churn butter, make clothing, help at a birthing, or have children of her own. Being able to write your own name was essential. Being able to read in front of a fire in winter was pleasant. But anything beyond that, some families felt was just vanity. Grandmother didn't feel that way, and neither did her sister Rose, who was 2 years older. They had walked 3 miles to the log cabin school where, with 20 other settler students, they had received the fundamentals of a solid education from a slip of a girl hardly a decade older than her beginning students. After 8 years for Rose and 7 for Lily, they reached the point where they might have been expected to spend 2 or 3 years putting a postgraduate polish on their housekeeping skills and then getting married. Instead, they went to high school, Lily skipping the 8th grade and Rose waiting a year so that they could go together. According to grandmother, Rose claimed she didn't really wait for Lily. It just took a year of pestering great-grandfather before he decided that if he was ever going to have any peace in his own house, he would have to send his 2 favorite daughters away to school. 2 trunks were purchased and filled with weekday necessiries. Grandmother sits in my bedroom hallway, filled with linens. A visit with the bishop to the nearest town with a high school resulted in a recommendation for a boarding house run by a widow of good character, one that supplied meals if the girls were willing to do light kitchen and cleaning duty, and which had an amazing attraction of which they had barely heard, much less ever seen: an indoor bathroom. Then, one Sunday evening in September, grandfather hitched a horse up to the buggy and, loading 15-year-old Rose and 13-year-old Lily and their supporting essentials aboard, drove the 17 miles into town. 5 days later, he would reverse the process, bringing back for the weekend 2 sophisticated young ladies full of stories for their brothers and sisters of life in an urban metropolis of 3,000 people. This pattern repeated itself for 4 years. Grandmother's stories were filled with the details of high school intrigue, triumph, and despair. I don't need to repeat them to you. When I eventually experienced my own, they did not seem much different than grandmother's, and I doubt that they were much different from yours. What we all waited for was the introduction of another boarder of the house into the story. A young man who was clerking at a local law firm. I can remember the first time I heard it, but even though I soon knew the answer to the repeated riddle, the question of whether this young law clerk, William Reynolds, would become our grandfather or our great uncle, never lost its thrill. Part of the relationship's interest came from the defiance of a cliche. You know the one, two's company. The three of them were always together, teasing one another in the boarding house, at the boarding house supper table, strolling in the same park, attending the same church service, and in the town's one oddity, to gather at the midweek church dance. The boarding house widow reckoned that if a waltz could be invented for 3 people instead of 2, they never would have left the floor. Both sisters had a mythic claim. One sister might claim, the desert bloomed like a rose, while the other one was named for Utah's symbol of home, mercy, and peace. But as you might have guessed, this part of the story could never end happily. There was a version of the tale, never told in my grandmother's living room, that grandfather had tried to solve the question of which sister would be his wife by asking both of them to become sister wives. But I never believed it. Not that such arrangements didn't continue to exist after Utah became a state, but if you'd ever experienced the dignity of my grandmother or the reserve of my grandfather, you would have concluded that it hadn't happened here. Nevertheless, tragedy and solitude did arrive together, just not the way that might have been anticipated. Someone once said that when a person dies, it's a tragedy. When 20 million people die, it's a statistic. At this point in our story, that someone was proved both right and wrong. As the girls' senior high school year drew to a close, events other than graduation and marriage were on everybody's mind. It was the time of the Great War, 4 years of inexcusable bloodshed that changed the world and laid the seeds for another great war barely 20 years later. A war that inspired Carl Fordham's song with which we began the story. Who knows how many people died in those 4 years? 9, 10, 12 million? We do know one thing, that the death count of this inconceivable horror was dwarfed in a single season by the great influenza epidemic. No family was unaffected. Everyone knew someone who died, and everyone lived in terror that someone in their family would be next. 20 million people died, and countless others came close to death. One of the first to collapse was Lily. With every bed in the hospital full, she was taken to the rooming house. Well, messengers were sent to fetch her family. For days she lay in a scent-stained bed, restless, sometimes threshing uncontrollably, hallucinating dreams that no one would want to share, sometimes catatonically still, never more than a breath away from the grave. And at her side, every minute, was her sister Rose, wiping her face with a cool, wet cloth, massaging her wrists, replacing her sheets, praying, and keeping her in this world by a superhuman act of will. After 5 days, she fell into a deep sleep. When Lily awoke a week later, Rose was dead. It sometimes happened like that. The patient lived and the caretaker died. Was Rose's 24-hour exposure to Lily's illness the cause of her own? Would Rose have survived had she not already been exhausted when she fell ill? Who knows? Some people worked with the sick their entire epidemic and never had a sniffle. Some walked out of their houses perfectly healthy in the morning, fell down in the street on their way to work, and were dead before sunset. By the time she awakened, Lily had missed her sister's funeral. If grandmother felt guilty, she never mentioned it. She was taken home. A week later, she was back in her room alone, studying hard to make up for the time she had missed. In September, she married William Reynolds in the living room of the family ranch. If the shadow of her Rose ever came between them, there is no record of it in family legend. Her first daughter was named Rose, and when that child died, she named the second Laura. She too is gone now, but her nickname was Rosie, after her complexion, and I never heard her called anything else. The third daughter was named Lily, and she was my mother. Sometimes grandmother would go further back than her own childhood and recount the tales told to her by her own grandmother, who came to the family homestead at the edge of the desert in the womb of her mother in the fall of 1448. She had no personal memories of that woman, but grew up with the dozens of tales of her courage through the trek across the plain, her kindness to others, her knowledge of herbal medicine, and how she had willingly answered the call to settle with her husband in an area that had no preparation for human occupation beyond a couple of lean-tos and provisions sufficient to survive only in the mildest of winters. Still, what she must have been like to my great-grandmother came to understand not from words, but from the actions of her father, who was the only widowed man under 60 in the settlement never to marry again, and from the fact that it was not the men's strength that served the little outpost, but her kindness. The Mormons were the first white men to settle that territory, but they were not the first people to live there. That was the Shoshones, under Chief Tukwata. The Mormons believed that the Indians were Lamanites, members of the lost tribe of Israel, who had been turned black for having worshipped idols. But if anyone was lost, it was the settlers. In that time that was left that season, the Shoshone taught them where to hunt for seed and wild vegetables, and how mustard and sunflower seeds could be ground up to serve as mush and sun-dried to be used as bread. In return, Chief Tocquata brought his daughter, who had severe gastric problems, to the white woman healer, and was pleased to have her back well and strong. But though a woman great with child might be able to cure another's stomachache, she could do nothing to fill her own during the most devastating winter the little group was ever to experience. 50 years after that winter, grandmother's grandmother could still quote to her the camp recipe for boiled hide. 1, scorch and scrape the hair off. Scalding gives the hide bad taste. 2, parboil for 1 hour in plenty of water and throw away the water and glue. 3, wash and scrape again, rinsing often in cold water. 4, boil to a jelly and allow to cool. 5, serve with a sprinkling of sugar. In March, great-great-great-grandmother died in childbirth, with grandmother's grandmother surviving. Her father gave her to another woman in camp to care for and refused to look at her. The Shoshone came to the white woman healer's funeral and sprinkled seed over the grave. No one objected. Each one mourns in his own way. And in this new land, the settlers could hardly claim to be experts. And so the spring came, and the pioneers planted crops as they were bidden, and they grew as had been promised, and then came the grasshoppers. They were not crickets, which the mythic seagulls could vanquish. They were 6-legged angels of death, which blackened the sky for days at a time. The woman in charge of great-great-grandmother suddenly experienced an eclipse of the sun and heard a thumping against the walls and floor of her shack and door of her shack. Outside of the building was covered with millions of Rocky Mountain locusts, and her garden and the grass in her yard were being devoured. The laundry on her clothesline were stained as with tobacco juice, stains that she was never able again to remove. The grasshoppers stayed for weeks, while feudal men fought with them with rakes and shovels and set back fires, which they easily flew over. And then one morning, as at Satan's signal, they rose up in a single swarm and disappeared over the western horizon, leaving nothing behind but long stripped stems in the dirt surrounding the grave of the white woman healer, who was my great-great-great-grandmother. The people stood and watched them go, their hopes as dead as the land around them. And then they noticed someone else standing among them. It was Chief Tocquata of the Shoshone. He walked to the grave on which he had scattered the seeds months before and pulled up a stem. At the end was the soft, bulbous root of the sago lily, just like one of hundreds within a few yards. If the Shoshone language, and in the Shoshone language, sago means eating bulb. And that day, my family became bulb eaters. the father of my great-great-great-grandmother, rushed to the shack of the building, to the woman to whom he had given her, and carried the baby to her mother's grave. There he held her high in the sky. I christen thee, Lily, for you will be the nourishment of this family for all time to come. And there, grandmother would end her story saying, I am the third Lily, and as long as I can give nourishment, the family will continue to prosper. And here, as the fifth Lily, I end my story, having passed it on to my daughter and to my granddaughter for as long as the family will last. Okay. So that's the hard one to do because your nose starts. Okay, I got one more.
Yeah.
Or is it time?
I'm thinking it's after
It is time.
At what time is it?
It's 8
It's
o'clock.
after 8.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. And the next one is not nearly as pleasant.
I guess it'll give more insight instead of, I can't think of the word. It'll give people more reason to buy the book.
Yeah.
Well, what you got essentially is, I suppose none of these three are that happy. This is not a big happy one.
No.
Just
So, going back to the last one.
Mhm.
Yeah, I knew you liked it. Yeah.
No, I also just got confused. I got confused by who was what Lily. So the
Oh, at the end, it's the grandmother telling the story, and the younger woman who first heard the story when she was a girl and had time off from working in the kitchen.
Okay.
She was named Lily, and she named her daughter Lily, and her granddaughter is named Lily.
So, the original Rose and Lily,
Mm-hmm.
were they her grandmother? I mean, was that Lily, her grandmother?
That was her grandmother and her great aunt.
grandmother. Okay, and her great aunt. And then she talked about her grandmother who had come across the plain,
Uh-huh.
and she was the one who was a healer.
Her grandmother, yeah, was the healer.
Was the healer, and the chief brought his daughter, and she healed her, gave it back.
The Shoshone chief, yeah.
Yeah, the Shoshone chief, and she healed the daughter
Mm-hmm.
of the chief. And then the chief comes to her funeral and sprinkles
Spreads the seeds.
seeds. Was it like lily seeds he was spreading?
Yes.
Or- okay.
Spreading them on the grave.
Ah.
And so then they, after the grasshoppers had been there, they were just these thin things. And the chief went over and pulled one up, and there was the lily, the edible lily, underneath, except that the grave was covered with hundreds of these things.
Oh wow.
So the people had something to eat. Okay, so that's the big, and the story of the women going to high school was my mother and my aunt.
Yeah.
So the story about founding a new town in Utah is her family.
Yeah, I just figured that I'd take
Yeah.
my family and push it in.
Yeah.
I've still got from 1923. I've still got the program from the senior class play that they were in. Because my mother was a natural actor. Yeah.
No, I just.
Yeah,
laughing
so
because you
my
are.
something great, I don't know how many greats, original wagon train where Brigham Young was. He was like in one of the next ones, and he had led it. He was one of the people who led it. My mom has copies of his journal, but he was one of the ones that Brigham Young sent. So like the area where my mom grew up in Wellington, Utah, like a lot of those areas in that area, he was sent ahead of time, obviously along with other people, but not his family, to go and make the land somewhat inhabitable to start families, and he would start towns, and then he'd bring his family over, and then as soon as the towns would be up and going, he'd move on to another town to start, and he did that again and again and again, and his wife was kind of like the local doctor person who they would call, because I don't know what kind of healing she did, but she was the one who had the medical knowledge, which was just self-taught from.
I didn't know that, but I
Yeah.
guessed it.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and then
He knew it with telepathy.
And then he's also the one who had 2 wives,
Mhm.
and I come from the second wife. But the second wife, so the second wife was younger, and he already had like,
Nicely said.
yeah, he already had like 9 kids from the one, and then he had several kids from the second one. The second one died during childbirth. The first one raised all of her kids, and there's records of him taking in other children from other families when the fathers died. So it's just, I like learning about him.
Where were
It's
you
just
when I
amazing.
needed you? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's just kind of an amazing story, and it's very interesting. There's also a story that apparently, the Sundance Kid or whatever, the outlaw. So one of his daughters ran away with him.
Oh,
With
one
his-
of
One of his,
your relative's daughter.
ran away with the
Sundance
Oh.
Kid. But there's also somebody is saying there's also some evidence that she wasn't one of the biological daughters. She was one of the daughters
He
that
took
he had
in.
taken in
Yeah.
when other people had died. And so it was this big, taboo thing that she had gone, and she was with this outlaw and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, because apparently the Sundance Kid was part of a network, like an underground network.
Oh, yeah.
Where he was friends with the Mormons, and the Mormons, he was helping them hide polygamy or something like that.
They didn't care for the government that much.
No. And so he had kind of this whole thing, so he knew them really well. So one of the times that he was visiting, he, saw this girl and decided to make her his wife. Yeah. So anyway, that's it. That's an interesting, yeah. But if you go down in the Price area, Wellington area, a lot of those cities, there's like statues of my ancestors, and apparently he was also sent, which makes sense after the tour yesterday, into what is now areas of Arizona that he helped settle, and so there's a lot of towns that he helped settle. So yeah.
I was gonna say, Fillmore County is mentioned in the 3rd story.
Oh. Remind me, what was the 3rd story?
Submitted for your consideration.
Yeah.
I'm gonna end the video now.
Oh, okay. You didn't have to keep it going.
Yeah.
Well, I just thought it was interesting.
Oh, what I was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Bye bye.